If you're watching this, then tomorrow night is Tu B'Av, or maybe you're watching it a little bit later, and tonight is Tu B'Av, or you're watching it on the day of Friday, and it is Tu B'Av. Now, if you don't know what Tu B'Av is, let me tell you very briefly. It is a day of the Jewish calendar year in the Hebrew month of Av, which occurs in the summer, which starts off with very, very bad um, feelings and many atrocities that have happened throughout the years, including the destruction of both temples, many issues with the Crusades, Holocaust, and many other types of destruction. The month really starts absolutely terribly, and it culminates in absolute horror on Tisha B'Av, which was the day which a lot of these really, really bad events happened. Now, going from that, we actually go to one of the happiest days of the year, which sounds perplexing that they could only be 6 days away, right? Tisha B'Av is the ninth day of the Hebrew month of Av, and Tu B'Av is the 15th day. So it's a matter of only 6 days, right? And also we know that the ninth day going into the 10th day, that there's still a lot of sorrow even on the 10th day. So when does it really turn around, right? It really turns around starting on the 11th, but there's still kind of like this sorrow that surrounds the month, and only when we really hit the full moon point of the month, which is the middle of the month. A month in the Jewish calendar is 30 days, right? So exactly halfway is 15. Now, yes, some have 29, some have 30, but the way the scholars put it, a Jewish month has 30 days. Again, it may actually only have 29, but we regard it as, in general and principle, as having 30 days. And therefore, the midway point is 15. Actually, if it's 29, then the midway point is exactly 15 if you understand how math principles work. So either way, 15 is the middle of the month. It's the time when we hit the full moon. And there's so much to be talked about. There's absolutely so much to be talked about the relationship between the Jewish people and the moon, the relationship between women and the moon, and the relationship between people in general and the moon. There's so many lessons, stories, speeches, everything you can think about talking about the concept of the moon. And there are many things that actually happen on the 15th of a particular month, right? Starting from Passover, Pesach, right? That is on the 15th of Nisan, right? It's at the exact midway point of Nisan where we have the most potential symbolized by the full moon. We even have Sukkot, right? Which I believe is called Pentecost by other people. I don't know. Or the Feast of Tabernacles, or no, Pentecost is what we call Shavuot, which is the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai. But the Feast of Tabernacles is what other people call Sukkot. There you go. We call it Sukkot, which takes place in the fall after the high holidays. Going to be probably about mid to late October this year. That also starts on the 15th of a month. There's many parallels between Passover and Sukkot, Pesach and Sukkot. It's not the only thing that happens on the 15th. We also have Tu B'Shvat, which is the holiday for the new year, really, for the trees, right? It's a time of growth and potential, again symbolized by the full moon. And then also Purim, right? Purim, which many of you are probably familiar with, is a holiday we celebrate a month before Passover in most years, actually really all years. And it, not getting into with the holiday, but it's also an extremely, extremely joyous holiday. Perhaps the most joyous holiday of the year. We get dressed in costumes and we learn about a lot of different things. It's a very, very incredible holiday, and that also takes place either on the 14th or the 15th. In Jerusalem and in walled cities, it takes place specifically on the 15th. So again, there's this concept of the full moon and this concept of amazing potential. And there's a very famous teaching. And again, if I say something that you already know, then just please bear with me. If I say something that you've never heard before, please let me know, and I'd be happy to tell you more about it or give you plenty of resources to find out more about it. So there's a concept of waxing and waning, as we all know. So waxing is when the moon starts to grow larger. Mooning, sorry, waning is when the moon begins to get smaller. So we start off in a time of darkness, not necessarily bad darkness, but a time of uncertainty, and that's at the beginning of the new month, right? When the moon can't really be seen, right? Sometimes the most faint crescent, right? It's a time where there's a lot of expectation, right? And it starts getting a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. It's a beautiful crescent. It's a quarter moon. It's a half moon. we finally done it. We finally reached our destination. We've reached the full moon, which represents full potential. But then it starts to ebb away again. And like, well, so hold on, let's see. Wait, we're going no, no, we're going away, we're going away, and then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and then the moon vanishes. But yet we know that it's part of a natural cycle. Now there's a very famous teaching which I like to tell people around Hanukkah. There's a very famous teaching. It's actually not that surprising that the Festival of Lights is not the only Festival of Lights, right? You have Diwali, you have Saturnalia, which became Christmas, and I think many other cultures have a concept of bringing light out of the darkness. Now, our sages teach us that that actually comes back to a story by Adam Harishon, Adam, the first man, where in his first year on Earth, after he had eaten from the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge, and he was worried that he was going to die because God told him he was going to die. Now, at that point, he didn't know that that would just mean that he was mortal in general and he would live for another 929 years. But he didn't know what it meant, and he saw the days getting shorter as it starts getting to the fall, like what we would call October, November. He sees the days getting shorter, the sun's going down earlier, it's getting darker earlier, it's rising later. So he basically thinks the world is closing in on him and he's just going to die because the sun's going to just give out. And then he sees, around the time of the solstice, the winter solstice, he sees, wait a minute, it just got a tiny bit longer. It got a tiny bit longer. And then he sees that the sun starts being a little bit later and later and later and later, and the day's starting earlier and earlier, and the day's getting longer again. And he realizes it's part of a natural cycle, and therefore he just was so overjoyed that when God said that he was going to die, it didn't mean right away, and that he literally had 929, 930 more years of his life to really activate and utilize his potential. And, we can't even fathom how much time that is. But, like, he realized that there is this amazing cycle that God put into play, known as nature, even though he was very, very aware of all of these other supernatural, ways of connecting the spiritual and physical worlds, right? So therefore, he celebrated that with a festival of lights and became a designated time for many people of the world, including the Jewish people, to have a festival of lights. I'm not getting any more into that, but there's a similar concept by the moon that we can see it if you start from the middle, right? If you start from the point of the 15th, you see it starting to shrink and shrink and shrink. And let's say you just appeared on this world, right? Let's say you were born as an adult, and you see the moon. You see it's beautiful on the 15th, 16th gets a tiny bit smaller, 20th it's already a lot smaller, starts getting smaller and smaller, and then by the time you hit the 29th of the month, or the 30th/1st of the month, it's gone. And you're petrified out of your wits because you have no idea. You just came to this world, you wouldn't know. But then you start to see, oh wait, a couple days later, crescent starts appearing, it gets bigger and bigger, and you realize it's part of a natural cycle. But yet there's still something that's very majestic about it at the same time. And there's also many factors that are involved. Like, okay, are the clouds covering it? Are the clouds not covering it? And of course, a lot of this can be explained in the physical realm. And the physical and spiritual realms are not meant to be exclusive, right? They're meant to be intertwined, right? Whether you want to call it the full heavenly world, the metaphysical world, combination thereof, whatever you want to call it, all right? God gave us nature and the natural world as a guide, not only to help us in this world, but to help us relate to a world outside of ourselves. And there's so much symbolism involved, right? We know now from science that we're not, skin, bones, clothes, right? Everything is made of matter. And matter is made of atoms. Atoms are made of subatomic particles. Subatomic particles are made of strings and beads of energy. Energy is just made out of pure energy. They don't really understand that. Although Kabbalah teaches that that's really a manifestation of God's will. Again, not getting into that right now. But there's a lot of things that, especially in today's world, we understand. We understand that there's so much more deep beneath the surface. Just imagine before they had microscopes. They had no idea about this concept of bacteria and germs or anything that was microscopic, even little particles, right? But we know so many more things now, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more, even in the physical world, that we have no clue about. But there's also so much symbolism, some of which we do know about because our sages teach us that. The Torah teaches us that. The tradition teaches us that, right? Our rabbis, Even sometimes people in the secular world can teach us that, right? Because if you're really, really attuned to the natural world, then you realize there has to be something more. Regardless of whether you're Jewish or not. There's something super, super special, and it's just captivating once you realize it. It's just something, and we're better to look than the moon. The moon teaches us so many lessons, and I can only just barely to get into it. But what's specific about Tu B'Av, right? Tu stands for Tet and Vav, which is 9 plus 6, which is 15, to symbolize the number 15 instead of using Yud and Hey for a couple different reasons. But effectively, what's special specifically about Tu B'Av, especially when you think about when is the moon growing, right? The moon is growing in the first half of the month, yet that's the saddest part of the month, when the moon is growing. And that's teaching us so many important lessons, right? Sometimes when you think things are amassing, not everything that's amassing is good. Not everything that's growing is good, right? So what if what's growing, symbolizing by the moon growing, are troubles? What if there are what we call tsaras, sorrows, difficulties, problems in this world? What if that's growing? If you look at it that way, then the growing of the moon is reversed. When the moon is growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, the load is getting heavier and heavier, right? And it might not be good. But then you hit the full moon and that's it. Sigh. I can breathe because I know it's going to get easier from here. And it represents a cycle, right? Obviously, there's two ways of looking at everything. Sometimes there's many more than two ways, but certainly there's two ways of looking at everything, half empty, half full. So you could look at the moon. When it's growing, are you growing with potential? And then sometimes you lose your potential. And then you got to go back around and get it back again and activate it. Everybody's going through cycles and difficulties in their lives. Is your difficulty growing? Then sometimes you have a reprieve. You're able to grab the reins again and get a hold of your life, right? So it's very interesting that Tisha B'Av and the first half of Av really gives us a different perspective. That sometimes when you're growing, right, we all want to grow personally. We want to grow in our physical lives, spiritual lives. We want to make ourselves better. But we don't want to make our complications better, right? So sometimes we actually need less, and less can be more, because then we can pull back. We can pull back, reestablish the reins, as I call it, and go into the next cycle fresh. Now, coming up after Av, we have the month of Elul, right? Elul is a time of introspection. It's a time where many people start saying slichot, which are supplementary prayers and benedictions, praying for forgiveness and beseeching God, Hashem, and connecting with Him as the Father and Master of the world, as well as our King. Now, it's interesting. The word Av, which is the name of this month that we're in right now, right? It may not have been the original way it was called, but that's what we've been referring to it for a very long time. Aleph Bet, right? It means father, specifically as a title of a father as opposed to Abba, right? Av, the father, right? It is a time where we're just starting to realize, obviously the goal is to think about God, our Father in heaven, all times of the year. But it's a time right before we hit the moment of real introspection. Those 30 days before we hit what we call the high holidays, right? Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where we really have this immense entrenchment in our connection and relationship with God, and hopefully each other as well. Before we reach those 30 days where we're leading up to and preparing for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we need to do some other work. We know Chazal, our sages, teach us that the temple, both temples, but especially the second temple, was destroyed because of sinas chinam, hatred between one's fellow man, discourse, machlokes, divergence, whatever you want to call it, right? People not getting along, people being mean, cruel, slandering, whatever it might be, not understanding just because you're different, whatever it might be, right? It doesn't matter. We're all God's children. And it doesn't mean that, you should love a wicked person the same way you should love a right. But ultimately, you need to be respectful. You need to be kind. Every single person is made in God's image. And we don't know what people are going through. And we don't have to love everybody, right? When it says, my famous my rabbi, Rabbi Silber, has said this, and I think I've heard other people say it as well. Love everybody like yourself. What does that mean? That's why it's sometimes reinterpreted as treat others like you would treat yourself. It's hard to love everybody, especially people who are wicked, who have done things wrong to you. You can't be expected to love them. But what does it mean to love them? It means to love the fact that they are a human being, that God put them in this world for a reason. Now, maybe that they're completely not living up to their potential, and maybe they're completely doing the opposite of what they were put in this world to do. Sometimes we know, sometimes we don't. But they're still here, and as long as they're in this world, they have a role to play. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, but they have a role to play. And as long as they're here in this world, we have to have some, even if it's the tiniest bit, of acknowledgement that there is a walking image of God before us, right? Now, it doesn't mean that we have to, respect them, bow down to them, whatever, but we have to have some element of respect, even if it's not a personal respect. But just recognizing that the fact that we have all of these capabilities as a human being, and we're endowed with so many strengths and insights of our Creator, our Father in heaven, many of which we haven't even been able to tap into, that many people are not even aware of. Right? So we have this time where we specifically want to work on patching up our relationship with our fellow man or woman, right? Our fellow being, right? Our fellow being made in the image of God, right? Jew or not Jew, it doesn't matter. Obviously we can relate to people that are closer to us, but every person matters. Now, Av is a time where we need to work more than ever on what's called Ben Adam Lechavero. One man and another man. One woman and another woman, man, woman, it doesn't matter. One person and another person, one divine being, because they're made in the image of God with another person, and our relationship with each other. That's what we have to work on this month, and then once we get better at that, then we can move on to work on our relationship with God in Elul, when we start preparing, leading up to the high holiday of Rosh Hashanah. Now, what's interesting, we're leading up to this day. We first get over the sorrow, we mourn the things that we may have done wrong to each other, and then we reach the pinnacle when this is not the end of the month, but the middle of the month, when the moon is full, the 15th of Av, where we have the greatest potential, not just to grow, but the greatest potential for love, which is why Tu B'Av is also known as the holiday of love. It was a day back in the day which had many, many different circumstances that were positive, including you had, women going out in white dresses, everybody, not poor, rich, everybody was wearing the same thing, so people wouldn't judge, and they would be meeting each other, and it would be a beautiful scene, and it would lead to so many amazing, amazing matches, and people would get married and be happy, and there are so many reasons. I'm not getting into it right now, but there are so many reasons why this is a very joyous day, and it's a day that's connected to love. But it's not only the love between a husband and wife, or love between family members. It's the love of a fellow human being as well. There is something about being intact, like the moon is, right? The moon's always there, right? In other words, whether we see it or not, the moon's always there. In fact, half the moon we never see. But the perception that God gives us teaches us an infinite amount of lessons. And we're just beginning with this, right? We want to see ourselves as whole. How can we be whole if other people who God put in this world are not whole? Which means we have an obligation to help them. Sometimes that means helping ourselves first, depending on our circumstances, right? And we can help different people in different ways. Sometimes it's not physically helping them. Sometimes it may be encouraging them. Sometimes it may not be even literally reaching out to them, but setting a good example for others to follow. That helps more than you imagine, right? Saying hi to people, smiling, giving a little bit of charity, whatever it might be, right? Setting a good example for your kids, your community, and everybody who passes you by and that you meet, right? That is part of the lesson. When we have this Tu B'Av, we reach this circle. That's why it's the happiest day of the year. Now that we've reached this point, and we hopefully have reached a point of true love, not necessarily with our spouse or anything like that, but a true love connecting us to another person, now we can be really besimcha, and we can really be happy, because we know that, at least in that respect, we're fulfilling God's will, where He wants us to be together in unity as much as possible, right? And so much discourse, so much hate going on right now. We have to work on that. That's the biggest problem in the world. I think it's the only problem, but it's the biggest problem. is the disunity and discord amongst people, and not pointing blame. Sometimes there's reasons to, but we point blame way too much. We need to start focusing also on what's right, what people are doing right, how we can help people. Don't just worry about, oh, that's a problem, maybe I'll fix it, but ultimately those people are bad. It's not always that simple, right? The moon's teaching us that it's not black and white. It just doesn't turn off and go like, here the moon's there, gone, here, gone, here, gone. It's a whole phase. There are shades of gray. Sometimes you see the moon, sometimes the clouds move in, they obscure it. There's so much that's there. And now that we're going through this time, we want to work on perfecting ourselves and relationship with other people. And then we can work on, hopefully, patching up our people skills, if you will, with our skills in the divine creator, right? That once we know how to interact with, quote unquote, God's gifts, which are other people, and as well as many other things, really everything, then we can have a much better relationship with God, and he'll be much more willing in a certain sense to have a relationship with us. Unity is so important, in a sense, symbolized by the moon. Now, there's one last piece I wanted to bring about. There's one person who I've had the opportunity to get to know in the last few weeks, and she has had some of the most difficult circumstances I can imagine. I'm not going to get into it. It's personal. And we don't know why people go through difficult things. But part of what she went through was because other people were terrible to her. And that was unavoidable, right? There may be certain medical things she couldn't avoid, and that's something that has to be dealt with on a personal level. But when you mistreat somebody, that their whole life becomes messed up in a downward spiral. I'm not even getting into the concept that when you're in a bad place mentally and spiritually, that you attract negative forces that can even create more maladies, right? I mean, that's a whole other concept to talk about. Actually, my sister's the one to talk about that. But we have no idea the power. I mean, if the power to abuse somebody and do things like that can ruin someone's life, just imagine the power that we have to brighten someone's life. And it's much easier than you think, right? Say hi to people, smile. You don't have to give them everything in the world. You don't have to be the greatest, amazing person and give all the time of your day, give a million rides to a million different people, carry everything up and down the stairs for everybody. But when you see a need, act on it. Do what you can. You don't have to be Superman or Superwoman, right? It's not expected of you to do everything. But it is expected to you to perhaps do a little more than you are doing. Because we are a divine being in a certain sense. Because we are made in the image of God. We might not be gods, of course, right? God forbid. But we have an extra sense of divine energy that no other creatures on earth have. We as human beings are special, right? And we are all put in this world for a mission. Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson was talking the other day about the reason that every person was put in this world. Every single person was put in this world to accomplish something. Sometimes many things, sometimes it's just one thing. We don't know. But as long as God put you in this world, then you're meant to do something in this world, or you wouldn't be here, right? And sometimes it can be a whole bunch of things. Sometimes you may know what it is. Sometimes you might not know what it is. So why don't do as much stuff as you can? I'm not saying overload yourself. But if you have an idea, if you have certain talents, certain abilities, especially ones that are able to help people, then that's at least part of what you're meant to do in this world. And we have people who are going through so much, and the rate of depression is off the charts. It's very, very sad. But the rate of hatred and the rate of disagreements and people bashing each other and blaming is also off the charts. Murders are off the charts. Why can't kindness be off the charts? Why can't we be helping each other and just overcome these obstacles and barriers and overwhelm the world with good? Build up that moon or break it down, depending how you look at it. Whatever it is. We need to embrace who we are, right? Whether it's as Jews and our mission, whether it's non-Jews and as your mission, being just as anybody. We're all made in the image of God. We all have roles to play. We're all put in this world for a reason. Sometimes it's a very small thing to help the people around us. Sometimes it's a humongous reason to help the world at large. But every single person has a role to play. Every single person is their own moon, right? Their own moon in the sky. And they're reflecting the light of the sun, in this case, the sun being God, right? The sun shines in the sky. We don't see it at night, but it's always there, reflecting in the light of the moon, giving us warmth. Otherwise, we'd be in a cold, dead world. God is always there, whether we see him or not, whether we feel him or not. But a representative of God is also in the world. Every single one of us. There are almost 8 billion representatives of God in this world, right? Now, we as the Jewish people have an even greater role, but every single person in this world has a role to play to further the glory of God, glory of Hashem. And when is that most apparent? Right now. When we go from this time of terrible sorrow, and there's so many bad things happening in the world in general, not just in the Jewish world, but we go from this place of immense destruction and mourning, right, to a place of so much potential and hopefully a place of so much love. And we can use that to repair relationships and help build up the world, and ultimately also build up a relationship with God and what he wants from us, so that we can have a complete moon, a full wholesomeness in our lives and in the world, and hopefully make it a much, much, much better place. May it come soon. Bimheri Minu.